I'll come to order. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Click.
Present.
Rep Cortez.
Here.
Rep Busey.
Here.
Rep Burrows.
Here.
Rep Kane.
Here.
Rep Israel.
Here.
Rep Middleton.
Here.
Rep Swanson.
Oh, here.
8 to 1. Oh, it doesn't.
A quorum is present. Members, before we continue the agenda, I'd like to move to correct the minutes from our April 8th meeting. We had a witness that was on the witness list twice, and we need to correct that. The chair moves to correct the minutes for the meeting held on Monday, April the 8th. Are there any objections? Hearing none, it is so ordered. Thank you, members. We can proceed to vote. The chair lays out HB 1850 as pending business. Members, this is my bill relating to publishing early voting information. Are there any questions? Representative Busey moves that HB 1850 be reported favorably to the full House with a recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Click.
Aye.
Chair Cortez.
Yes.
Chair Busey.
Yes.
Chair Burrows.
Yes.
Chair Kane. Representative Kane.
Yes.
Representative Israel.
Yes.
Representative Middleton.
Yes.
Representative Swanson.
Yes.
8.
I like that.
There being 8 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails. The chair lays out House Bill 2586 as pending business and offers a complete committee substitute. Members, this is Representative Leach's bill relating to political contributions and expenditures. The substitute clarifies certain permissible communications and removes an unenforceable affidavit requirement. Are there any questions? Is there any objection to the adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, the substitute is adopted without objection. Representative Cortez moves that HB 2586 be substituted, be reported favorably to the full House with the recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Click.
Aye.
Rep Cortez.
Yes.
Rep Busey.
Aye.
Rep Burrows.
Aye.
Rep Kane.
Aye.
Rep Israel.
Aye.
Rep Middleton.
Aye.
Rep Swanson.
Aye.
There being 8 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails. The chair lays out House Bill 2909 as pending business. Members, this is my election practices cleanup bill. Are there any questions? Representative Israel moves that House Bill 2909 be reported favorably to the full House with a recommendation that it do pass and be printed and sent to the local and consent calendar. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Click.
Aye.
Rep Cortez.
Yes.
Rep Busey.
Yes.
Rep Burrows.
Yes.
Rep Kane.
Aye.
Rep Israel.
Aye.
Rep Middleton.
Aye.
Rep Swanson.
Aye.
There being 8 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails. The chair lays out House Bill 2911 as pending business. Members, this is my voter registration cleanup bill. Are there any questions? Representative Swanson moves that HB 2911 be reported favorably to the full House with a recommendation that it do pass and be printed and sent to the local and consent calendar. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Click.
Aye.
Rep Cortez.
I agree.
Rep Busey.
Yes.
Rep Burrows.
Aye.
Rep Kane.
Yeah.
Rep Israel.
Aye.
Rep Middleton.
Aye.
Rep Swanson.
Aye. And what number was that?
2911.
I thought I didn't have it on my list. I had 2910.
You motioned for it, Val.
Yeah, you made the motion, so.
There being 8 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails. The chair lays out House Bill 2982 as pending business and offers a complete committee substitute. Members, this is Representative Guillen's bill relating to the public inspection of early voting election information. The substitute added provisions of my House Bill 1850. Are there any questions? Is there any objection to the adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, the substitute is adopted without objection. Representative Kane moves that HB 2982 as substituted be reported favorably to the full House with a recommendation that it do pass and be printed and sent to the local and consent calendar. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Click,
Aye.
Rep Cortez.
Yes.
Rep Busey.
Yes.
Rep Burrows.
Aye.
Rep Kane.
Aye.
Rep Israel.
Aye.
Rep Middleton.
Aye.
Rep Swanson.
Aye.
There being 8 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails. The chair lays out House Bill 4255 as pending business. Representative Israel offers a complete committee substitute. Members, this is my bill relating to the county chair's authority over certain accounts. The substitute requires the county chair to have authority over the local party's primary and corporate bank accounts, not all accounts such as the general account. Are there any questions? Is there any objection to the adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, the substitute is adopted without objection. Representative Burrows moves that HB 4255 as substituted be reported favorably to the full House with a recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Click,
Aye.
Rep Cortez.
Yes.
Rep Busey.
Yes.
Rep Burrows.
Aye.
Rep Kane.
Aye.
Rep Israel.
Aye.
Rep Middleton.
Aye.
Rep Swanson.
Aye.
There being 8 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails. The chair lays out Senate Bill 893, the Senate companion to House Bill 2132. Members, this is the companion to my bill that deleted the requirement that the comptroller receive certain reports. Are there any questions? Representative Busey moves that SB 893 be reported favorably to the full House with a recommendation that it do pass and be printed and sent to the local and consent calendar. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Click,
Aye.
Rep Cortez.
Yes.
Rep Busey.
Yes.
Rep Burrows.
Aye.
Rep Kane.
Aye.
Rep Israel.
Aye.
Rep Middleton.
Aye.
Rep Swanson.
Aye.
There being 8 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails. Those are the bills for today that we will be voting on. And we will start laying out the rest of our bills. The chair lays out House Bill 365 and recognizes Representative Kane to explain the bill. Yes, you may.
Thank you, Chair and members. House Bill 365 would allow a greater number of Texas voters to exercise their right to vote on elective offices and ballot measures for low turnout election dates by moving all elections to a uniform November date. All the members of this committee are aware of the vast discrepancy in voter turnout between May and November elections. And so I believe a November election date will result in participation by a greater percentage of the electorate. Our representative government functions best when a majority of the electorate is engaged in the process. Moreover, I believe HB 365 would result in a cost-saving measure for our counties, because currently our counties are allocating taxpayer resources on multiple election dates per cycle. So by cutting down the number of elections, House Bill 365 would save time, cost, and make Texas more fiscally responsible. By their own actions, Texas voters have proven that they're more interested in exercising their vote during November elections. So I ask you join me in supporting this common sense reform for Texas voters. With that, I ask that I reserve the right to close and open for questions.
Members, are there any questions for Representative Kane? Okay. We'll reserve your right to close, Representative Kane. The chair calls Chris Davis, followed by Alan Vera and Lauren Sullivan. If y'all want to all come up.
Lauren's gone.
Lauren's gone.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Bill Sargent, is Bill Sargent still here? He's gone. Okay. Glenn Maxey. Mr. Davis, you want to start
Thank
us
you, Madam
off?
Chair. Chris Davis, members on behalf of the Texas Association of Election Administrators testifying in opposition to House Bill 365. Curious as what the author, when he laid this out, if he was accurate and he said that this moves elections to November elections. Isn't it even numbered year, uniform November elections? That's how we read the bill. With House Bill 3667, Representative Toth laid out, at least that one did move elections to Novembers of any year. This one, as we understand it, moves it to even numbered years, a little more restrictive than the other bill, and perhaps intended, perhaps unintended consequence of affecting elected representatives' terms, perhaps 3-year terms in home rule cities, school districts, those very folks that may be raising these bond elections in May. Their terms have just been extended perhaps by this bill. Of course, it creates long lines in November, are similar reasons for opposing it as the previous bill still exist.
Members, any questions? Mr. Davis, do you do any joint elections in your county?
Yes, ma'am, we do.
Okay, and when you do a joint election, say if a school board or school district or city are involved, who pays for the cost of those elections? How do you divvy that up?
It's a good question. In May, when it's just poly-sub, cities, school districts, utility districts, they're paying for that election. We divvy it up on a formula of the total number of registered voters in their district in an aggregate sense, and we use that as a cost share ratio. We do the same thing in November, but also add the county in Novembers, which we've typically seen Novembers of even odd numbered years having countywide elections, either the general gubernatorial, midterm, presidential, or constitutional in the odd numbered years. The county and the entire register voter number is also added in aggregate, and we use that's how we determine the cost share ratio. But direct answer to your question is they do pay their costs.
And now in like a partisan general election or even a primary, the counties are responsible for the cost of early voting. What about in those joint elections when you're talking a May election?
In a May election, the early voting costs are combined with the election day costs and split appropriately cost ratioed out to the entities. The county does not absorb those early voting costs in May elections.
Thank you very much. Anybody else have a question for the witness? Okay,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Vera.
Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, testifying in support of HB 365. This is a common sense bill, and we just think it's time to end the insane practice of having 3% of the registered voters of a district select the board that governs the district and lay debt obligations on the other 97% of the registered voters. We urge you to vote this bill out of committee.
Members, any questions? Thank you. Mr. Maxey?
Thank you. Glenn Maxey, Texas Democratic Party. We registered on this bill. We typically take a position that all elections should be in the highest turnout situation possible. Our only suggestion, Representative Kane, is that in the very large counties that we allow those elections to be in the odd year because of the length of ballots already in the even numbered years.
Members, any questions? Thank you. The chair calls Ed Johnson and James Quintero.
Hello, my name is Ed Johnson, and I am representing myself, and I am for HB 365. To start with, heard information that this would increase the lines at polling locations I have never seen in all my years of running elections that you have people, a larger population turnout just for a school board election over a presidential or a gubernatorial election. Those people that vote in school board elections in May, the 3%, vote in presidential and gubernatorial elections too. So they're at the polls. So it's not increasing the turnout. And like I said before, if you did the math, you're only adding possibly 7 more positions to the ballot. So you're not increasing the ballot by any great lengths. One that is also a misnomer is the cost of the elections. So you'll hear that it's less money to the districts to run them in May. Well, when you only have 3% of your voters turning out, then you can have fewer polling locations. And they actually plan on a 3% turnout, and they combine their polling locations so they have fewer polling locations, giving voters less opportunity to vote in their elections. So by doing them in November, you're having a polling location in every precinct, and you have multiple early voting locations that you can go to. But they are splitting the cost of that November election with the county. So, half the cost of that election is already being paid by the county. So on a per voter basis, turning out in their elections, it is actually a lot less expensive if they combine in November. It's just they're getting a 30 to 40% turnout instead of a 3% turnout.
Members, any questions? Mr. Quintero.
Madam Chair, members, James Quintero. I'm with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, here to testify in support of HB 365. I think, as we all recognize, public participation in the electoral process is a two-way street. It's, of course, incumbent upon citizens to exercise their right to vote, but it's also the responsibility of governments to create and maintain a system that strives for maximum public input, especially when it comes to fiscal matters. And I don't know, based on the data, that we can make that suggestion about our current system. So what I did is I went ahead and collected some turnout percentages in 6 of the largest counties in Texas. And I think, as you'll see from the data, it's fairly revealing that turnout is very low in May and it's very high in November. And then further, which again comes as no surprise. But further, if you look at turnout percentages in the even-numbered years, there's about a 10-to-1 difference, right? So under HB 365, I think if we move bond elections to those November elections, you're going to see a much larger participation rate on some of these major fiscal decisions. I think this is a good government common sense reform that's much needed, especially in today's local debt environment. So with that, I thank you for your time.
Members, any questions? Thank you both.
Thank you.
I would like to call up Keith Ingram with the Secretary of State. I have a few questions. I don't know whether anyone else does.
Good afternoon, committee. Keith Ingram here from the Secretary of State's Office Elections Division here on House Bill 365.
Mr. Ingram, on some of the school board or city council races, would it not also potentially require some type of charter revision in order to perhaps change the length of their terms of office in some instances?
Well, it would be a temporary lengthening unless they wanted to make it a permanent lengthening. So it would be kind of a one-time thing as they move to adjust their schedule. So there probably wouldn't need to be a charter amendment for that.
And do we not have, are there not like some cities that are currently on a November schedule, and maybe some school boards too?
There are.
Okay.
Yeah, there were quite a few that moved after the 2011 session with SB 100 when the calendar got elongated, and then EAs didn't have to contract with subdivisions in May of even-numbered years. So quite a few moved to November at that time when the window was opened.
So are those that are currently on a November schedule, or would they be on an even or an odd, or is it both?
Some are, yeah, it's both.
Okay. Members, do you have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 365? The chair recognizes Representative Kane to close.
Thank you, Chairman, members, and for the witnesses for adding value to this discussion, especially Mr. Glenn Maxey. You've added some value as well. Continue to be looking at the best ways to get this done. One thing we've learned from hearing these things is people are wanting uniform elections. Just how we do it is the question. So, something I hope this body can solve. With that, I do close.
If there are no objections, House Bill 365 will be left pending. The chair hears no objection. House Bill 365 is left pending without objection. The chair lays out House Bill 2450 and recognizes Representative Alverson to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to lay out House Bill 2450. I was listening to the testimony on the last bill. We're going to shift gears just ever so slightly from what I think was school districts, and we're going to talk about special purpose districts. House Bill 2450 amends the Texas Election Code to require special purpose districts to have elections for bonds for that district on uniform election dates, either the first Saturday in May in odd years, the first Saturday in May in even years for elections held by a political subdivision other than a county, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So it just kind of removes the current exemption that they have, that they can exist in statute where they can have their elections whenever they want, and it puts them under the same guidelines as everybody else. I'm sure I have some witnesses here that will happily testify, and if you don't have any other questions, I just reserve my right to close.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions for Representative Alverson? Okay. The chair calls Glenn Maxey and Ed Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Glenn Maxey, Texas Democratic Party. I think I registered on this bill. I'd like to change that to in favor of. Going to be in favor of. Yes, we agree that all of these small elections should be on a uniform date so people know when these elections might occur. As we've said throughout this session on other bills, we wish there was one place that people could find where these elections are and when they are held. But at least getting them on a uniform election day would be much helpful.
Questions, members? Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Ed Johnson, here testifying for myself. I am for House Bill 831. No, excuse me, which is 2450. Excuse me. Yes, it'd be great if you move them all to November. You're going to have the county, they'll have to almost go in joint with the county. You're going to have it on the county's website. You know where the elections are. You know all the good information about it. These districts in particular really need to be kind of reined in. I don't know if y'all ever looked at the water code and the other sections of government code that they have. They've actually written their own election code over there. They don't follow a lot of the rules that all the other districts do for running elections. So, yes, they need to be moved to where they have consolidated dates for their elections.
Members, any questions? Thank you very much. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on for or against House Bill 2450? The chair recognizes Representative Alverson to close on HB 2450.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. And if there's no further questions, I close. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no objection, House Bill 2450 will be left pending. The chair hears no objection. House Bill 2450 is left pending without objection. The chair lays out House Bill 4130 and recognizes Representative Swanson to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And committee members, of course. This bill fixes a certification problem with e-poll books. An e-poll book is a computerized system for electronically logging the signatures of voters who have appeared at a polling location to cast a ballot. These are becoming more common, especially in larger counties across Texas, as counties try to increase efficiency and reduce wait times. They vary in their design and are not required to have any specific functionality that would help to ensure election security. House Bill 4130 outlines certain requirements for electronic devices used as e-poll books. They must produce an electronic copy of the list of voters for the election judge after the polls close, display the voter's original signature. I think we're going to be doing an amendment there to make that if the device is able to capture those signatures. Accept a voter even when the device is offline. Provide the full list of voters registered in the county, indicating the jurisdictional or distinguished number for each territorial unit in which each voter resides. Timestamp when each voter is accepted at a polling place. Produce an electronic copy of the logs from each device for delivery to the Secretary of State that includes the polling location in which the device was used and the date and timestamp for when each voter was accepted by the voter's unique identifier, and update in real time. The bill gives the Secretary of State the ability to set standards and requirements for the certification of these devices and requires them to be certified annually. The bill also authorizes the Secretary of State to assess a non-compliance fee on any counties using a device that does not comply in 2 consecutive general elections for state and county officers. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I respectfully request my right to close.
Members, any questions? The chair calls Alan Vera, followed by Brandon Moore and Ed Johnson.
Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, testifying in strong support of HB 4130. Both parties want every eligible registered voter to be able to vote in every election for the district in which they actually reside, and neither party wants its voters' ballots notified by a voter, however random, who abuses his or her franchise by voting more than once in the same election. For early voting and for the evil countywide polling, the proper performance of the electronic poll books is critical. The electronic poll books have to properly register the voter at check-in and must communicate with the other electronic poll books that this voter has already voted in this election. Harris County is moving to countywide polling with electronic poll books that didn't work correctly in the November 6, 2018 general election. Many of the devices, especially those in public school facilities, fail to update at all throughout the day, let alone in real time. Some electronic poll books didn't even communicate with the other electronic poll books in the same polling location, let alone system-wide. When Harris County applied for countywide polling, current statute does not allow the Secretary of State to even question the functionality of these critical electronic poll books, let alone delay the approval until proper equipment performance can be verified. This bill allows the SOS to establish criteria for certification of these devices and establishes safety measures to audit the actual performance of the poll books after each election. We believe it's critical to voter confidence in the safety and accuracy of the early voting and countywide polling. We're sure that even the misguided champions of countywide polling don't want to enable voting fraud through multiple votes from a single voter. This bill is one important step toward improving election integrity for both early voting and countywide polling. We urge you to pass HB 4130 out of committee.
Questions, members? Mr. Johnson.
Yes, Ed Johnson here representing myself, and I am for the bill, HB 4130. Go back on my experience of working in county government for many years. I am actually kind of the architect of the voter registration election system that all the major counties use currently. And then I actually spent 4 years, my last 4 years in the county clerk's office, trying to develop an iPad e-poll book system, and was the architect also of the electronic poll book that was used for early voting in Harris County. And now I can let you know, since I'm no longer working there and won't get fired, we had problems with all of them. I will tell you, in major presidential elections, our early voting system that we used, the iPad, the laptops that we used, when we reach over 500,000 transactions in the queue, the server that had to run this with Oracle would crash. And it would be an hour to 2 hours before everybody would be back online again. So probably every day of early voting during the presidential, at some point in time, we would hit the max records, and that would crash, and there would be about an hour's time that nobody was online. Now, these machines all worked offline and kept checking voters in, but they were not transmitting to anybody else. So during that hour, you could have voted in any other location, and you would have been able to check in. And that's a logistic problem that needs to be solved by the software vendor, or getting better equipment and bigger pipelines to handle the data. That's why the fine in this is really kind of appropriate, because it just requires the county to spend money to get up to speed to where they can adequately handle these kind of transactions. The iPad system, we have the same thing. That's why we were, while I was in the county clerk's office, we never went to the Harris County vote centers, because we were working on election day to try to get all those to communicate together. There is no requirement on election day that they all, when you're doing precinct voting, that they have to communicate with each other. So we weren't breaking the law, but we never got there to where they were communicating 100% with each other on it. So it is a problem, and there is nothing in the Secretary of State's arsenal that they get to look at any of these devices to see how they work or what they're doing. This gives some guidelines desperately needed, since we are all seem to be headed marching toward countywide vote centers, and these are the devices that are going to be used to keep people from double voting on election day and possibly during early voting. That we need to have some kind of governance to them to make sure they're functioning properly. I will tell you, in all of this, the data center that it's going into, even though you may have voted on 2 different iPads or 2 different laptops, actually the data center only recovered your vote once in that software back in the home office. So you actually have to go to each individual field unit in all the major counties to find out if someone voted twice. Unfortunately, fortunately in Harris County we would do that, and we'd find people that voted twice during early voting. We were down for the hour or two. And every time we would submit those names to the DA's office, and nothing ever happened. So you need to be able to stop this before it happens, to prevent people fraudulently voting. 2008, Harris County had 12,000 people that voted twice in the primary.
12,000.
12,000.
Members, questions? Representative Middleton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question. So these electronic poll books, are they available through open records requests, the data? How do we see this?
Yes, some of the information is available through open record request. I will tell you, most of them are using a driver's license. When you walk in to check in, they're reading the driver's license information. So some of the data could be a driver's license number that's captured onto these electronic devices. That would not be open record, but anything that pertains to your voter record, your voter number, your birthday, name, address, all that is under an open record request.
I guess my follow-up on that is So they are available. So is there a timeline on making those available? So if someone, say, had an idea that there's some sort of voter fraud, should we maybe put in a timeline, perhaps somewhere that they have to be made available by 15 days or 30 days or a week or, some certain time certain, because time is of the essence,
Yes.
and anything to do with election law.
In conversations I've had with the author on this bill, I believe that's why it's kind of in the Secretary of State's option to set rules on this. The Secretary of State is probably going to be the governing body. That would be the best place to capture this information. That's in the bill, that you would require the counties to submit the log of transactions happening on these electronic devices. I believe you would be able to make an open record request from the Secretary of State's office if you wanted to do some data analysis on those records. And I would say let's leave it up to the Secretary of State to decide, how much time is it going to take to gather these records, and those kind of things would be my best suggestion on that. And I think the bill allows for all of that to happen.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Mr. Moore?
Madam Chair, members and guests, thank you for your time again this evening. My name is Brandon Moore. I am speaking on behalf of myself. Initially, I did register on this bill, but I would like to change that to in favor of the bill. Yes, ma'am, I am representing myself. Thank you much. As you've already heard, this bill does bring into the code and allows the Secretary of State to set up some parameters and rules so that we can actually set rules on how we're going to implement these systems, et cetera, and make this work. The one minor suggestion that I did have, and I did submit language to your office earlier, was that in the penalty section, that the non-compliance fee is to possibly change the shall assess to a may assess, so that the Secretary of State has discretion on whether or not to assess the fee. If they see that a county has actually had problems that they've tried to remedy and couldn't, just little minor things that happen 2 consecutive cycles in a row, they could choose not to assess that fee. However, if they see if there was any malfeasance there or intent to circumvent the law, they could still assess that. That'd be the one and only recommendation I would have. Other than that, I think it's a great bill.
Members, any questions? Thank you, both of you. The chair calls Chris Davis and Alexei Swirsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris Davis on behalf of the TAEA, testifying on House Bill 4130. We now understand that there may be non-compliance issues with electronic poll books. We're happy that, I believe the author mentioned in a potential committee sub, she'd qualify which kind of electronic poll books would need certification. I believe the author said electronic poll books that capture the signature electronically. There's some counties that use electronic poll books with a wet signature on a pen on paper. In preliminary discussions with the Secretary of State's office, we understand there may be some non-compliance issues that aren't listed in this bill, and we encourage perhaps as soon as this hearing on this bill, if the SOS could perhaps come up to provide material testimony on this to clarify what those may be. We wonder if an annual certification is necessary. If a system has been approved and certified, what would be the need to annually certify that again and perhaps preclude counties from continuing to use it, unless there's been, of course, material changes in that software. We appreciate Brandon Moore's recommendation, and we'd also like to echo that of the non-compliance fee being perhaps changed to a may, giving the SOS discretion. We're not aware of a non-compliance fee when counties were to consider using or using non-certified voting equipment, because I don't believe they can or are allowed to. We think the certification of this device would preclude a county from using it. Thank you.
Members, any questions? Mr. Davis, do you use electronic poll books?
We do laptops, but not of the electronic signature capturing variety. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have issues as far as during early voting that they're able to, as was mentioned before in Harris County, where they're able to sync up?
Only temporary sporadic issues based on cell coverage. Inevitably, our electronic laptops do sync up both with each other, which is a necessity, and with the mothership, our offices.
And is there a lag time involved in that?
Typically not, Madam Chair. When we instruct our poll workers to log on before the polls open, get them on the cellular network before the polls open to, if they haven't, when the polls close on the previous day during early voting, download those updates, as we call them, that occur from all the other participating locations in early voting.
Okay.
So they hit the ground running at 7 a.m. if that's when the polls open for early voting, synced up fully.
About how many registered voters do you have in your county?
330,000.
Okay.
We just passed Montgomery. Yay us.
So that I would assume, especially during early voting, do you have any idea how many transactions per day that might be?
Can you qualify or define transactions when it comes to?
When you're checking someone in with your electronic?
Easily in the tens of thousands per day with early voting. We have about 2/3 of our in-person voting populace in an election vote early voting. So,
in the section in there about annual recertification, do you think that it would be wise if there were software updates or security patches, those sorts of things, that those would need to be certified?
I'm not sure, Madam Chair. It's a really good question. I'd look to what the SOS would require. If it's a matter of just having the systems check the boxes on compliance, and these boxes stay checked regardless of the updates or tweaks or color schemes that some of these software systems may have, I don't know if that would necessitate annual recertification.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have a question? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ms. Swirsky.
My name is Alexi Swirsky. I'm representing myself. I am for Bill 4130 by Representative Swanson. The right to cast a ballot includes a corollary right not to have your legal vote canceled by someone else's fraud. Election integrity should not be seen as a partisan issue. All Americans have an interest in ensuring a fair and accurate process. This means not only making sure that every eligible individual is able to vote, but that his or her vote is not stolen or diluted through fraud. I am both an election judge and a poll watcher in Harris County. When I was an election judge in the November election, as far as I know, the iPad poll books worked beautifully, but how would I know if they weren't working well and someone was voting more than once in obviously 2 different or more precincts? Whether a malfunction allows someone to vote more than once or prevents a voter from legally casting a ballot, either outcome is unacceptable. It is an imperative to allow the Secretary of State to audit the reliability of the poll books. The accurate and timely performance of these potentially very helpful devices is necessary for just, honest, and fair elections. Please vote to pass House Bill 4130 out of this committee.
Members, any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 4130? The chair recognizes Representative Swanson to close.
Well, I was going to ask if we could just get a little comment out of Keith Ingram.
Sure. Happy.
Thank you.
I think Christina Atkins is the person registered with the Secretary of State.
Christina's wonderful. Could we possibly hear from Keith Ingram?
He'll have to register.
Okay.
Let me open it
You don't have anything to do anyway, Briscoe.
up. You'll need to register.
Good afternoon, committee. Keith Ingram here from the Secretary of State's Elections Division.
Chair
have
recognizes
you, Bill.
Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Ingram. Could you just comment on a few of the different things you've heard and things you've observed about the need for this kind of thing? Whether you would be able to set some good rules that put in place, just general things like that.
So currently, as you've heard, it is more or less the wild, wild west when it comes to poll books. And some of our counties have been taken advantage of by vendors who represented a product to be functional in all the ways it needed to be, and it turned out it wasn't. And so they had to modify it after the fact. If we had the ability to certify systems and make sure they can exchange data with our voter registration database on the front end, that would clear up a lot of problems before it was actually used in an election. So that would be advantageous for the counties.
One other question was on the ones that capture the signature, would you think it was that we should perhaps grandfather those in, but in the future require ones that capture signatures? What would be your opinion on that?
There is currently in the law, the little bit of authority we have over electronic poll books is with regard to the ones who have electronic signature capture. We do get the right to review those electronic signature capture devices before they're used in a county in an election. And so that currently exists for us to be able to do that.
So is that helpful to be able to, does that help avoid fraud or whatever, to be able to see those signatures?
It does, and for us to make sure that it displays all the appropriate affidavits in a way that the voter can see them and read them, and it's not just buried verbiage. You know, we those are the kind of things we look at when we look at the electronic signature capture devices.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any idea how many counties might be using those now?
Electronic poll books, I believe, we're in about 200 counties, so the vast majority.
Okay. And in order to do vote centers, that would be required. Would that be correct?
Not only poll books, but poll books that communicate in real time with one another, so yes.
Okay. Members, any other questions for Mr. Ingram? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 4130? The chair recognizes Representative Swanson to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you all heard from the testimony, this is something really needed. We need to catch up with the 21st century. We've got new technology. We've got to have some rules to make sure that we actually have good, effective technology. So with that, I close. Thank you.
If there's no objection, House Bill 4130 will be left pending. The chair hears no objection. House Bill 4130 is left pending without objection.
Let's do this. Chair lays out House Bill 4048 and recognizes Representative Click to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. With the elimination of straight ticket one-punch voting in 2020, election lines will be longer than ever. Voters will have to wait for longer than average times. When a county applies to join the countywide polling place program and are approved, ultimately they're able to reduce their voting locations by 50%. With the increased wait times in 2020, reducing polling locations is not a good idea. House Bill 4048, as filed, is broader than I intended, and I am working on language for a committee substitute that would clarify that only those counties not participating in the countywide polling program as of 9/1/19 would be included. Essentially, any county who isn't participating on 9/1/19 would be ineligible to participate after 9/1/19. I'm open for questions and reserve the right to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, are there any questions for Representative Click? Representative Swanson.
Yes. Now, what if a county is in the experimental stage and has gotten to have a probationary election, say in May? Would they be eligible?
Yes, they would.
Is that all? Representative Swanson? That's it?
That's it.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, members? All right, seeing none, we'll begin public testimony. Chair calls Chris Davis. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the measure, and we will be timing your testimony to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Chris Davis, the aforementioned misguided champion of vote centers, and proud of it, testifying on behalf of TAEA against House Bill 4048 is filed. Madam Chairwoman, thank you for mentioning that you have a sub in the works, potentially grandfathering those counties above your threshold, which I count 5, 6 after May. That would be fiscally impacted if they would had to have removed themselves from successful programs and possibly buy even more equipment than they ever intended to purchase. We've heard time and time again today that a concern on the countywide polling place program is long lines. And county election officers, be they clerks or EAs, they don't like long lines either. And we constantly adjust and modulate the deployment of machines, the hiring of people, and yes, even the addition of polling places to combat long lines. We think you're right with what we're going to be facing in 2020 for all the reasons we've talked about previously for long lines. But if we have long lines, we're considered a failure, and we don't want to be seen as failures. We want to have voter convenience. This program has succeeded just about everywhere it's been tried. There are members of this committee that are from districts that include counties, be they Galveston, be they Lubbock. EA of Lubbock, Dorothy Kennedy, is the dean of vote centers. She's the first one to have ever done it, pilot program, and she did it to a lot of success. We wonder if there may not be room for a compromise in that we get counties that are not yet in it above this threshold of 400,000 to perhaps commit to deploying countywide polling places at the same level and number of places that they have in their precinct-based. And let's see what happens. Let's re-examine and reanalyze how things went in the elections in 2020.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Madam Chair.
So your suggestion is that they would do vote centers, but it would be more like the election day precinct voting places.
In terms of number, Madam Chair.
In terms of number.
Yes, ma'am. And perhaps consistency, similar, and I'm sure most counties want to keep the same locations, or as many of the same locations that have been used in a precinct-based system, just so voters become accustomed to them. We'll hear about it if there are long lines or if there's been a change, and our commissioners court will hear about it as well, and also turn to county election officers and ask what the problem is and how can it be fixed.
And, you know, if they were to get those complaints, because we're talking election day, it'd be kind of late to do anything. You know, like during early voting, you can sometimes add machines at a site. That's harder to do.
It's harder to do with older age equipment, newer generation, next generation equipment. You can actually mod and change and add more machines to sites, or take site machines from a slow site throughout the day on election day and move them to another, because particularly the ballot marking devices, which have no results on them, you can adjust on the fly during an election day and not have to wait for a postmortem.
But that assumes if you've got the newer equipment.
That assumes
if you're
that.
Using the older equipment, that would not be possible.
That's my understanding with some of the old equipment. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions, members? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair calls Alan Vera.
Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, testifying in support of HB 4048. Any continued expansion of countywide polling continues to expand the flawed TEC 43.007 as it currently exists. That section of code allows a 50% reduction in the number of polling places in a given county. As it exists, that section of the code allows some gamesmanship in the apportionment of polling locations by county commissioner precinct. And as it exists, that section of code does not require any verification of the functionality of the electronic poll books, which are critical for the integrity of countywide polling. For these reasons, we support 4048 because you have a choice. Either you fix TEC 43007 or you use 4048 to prevent spread of the problem. Any questions?
Members, any questions? Thank you. Chair calls Monica Richard. Thank you.
Good evening, representatives. My name is Monica Flores Reichart, and I'm Director of Compliance for the Harris County Clerk's Office, and I am here to testify in opposition to House Bill 4048. I came here prepared to ask you to permit Harris County to continue with countywide voting, and I understand your committee substitute would permit us to do that, and I thank you. I just wanted to mention a few things. Dr. Troutman, the county clerk, started this year with a commitment to engage the community on countywide voting, and the application process was approved unanimously in Commissioner's Court. And if you know anything about Harris County Commissioner's Court right now, that's rare. And so we are grateful for that opportunity. We were approved by the Secretary of State, and we're looking forward to starting our program. I just wanted to mention one thing that we are doing in the program. It is our priority to re-enfranchise a lot of these voters who are otherwise qualified and just unable to vote because they arrived at the wrong polling location. We estimate more than 2,000 people in last November's election filled out provisional ballots that were otherwise qualified and not permitted to vote simply because they went to the wrong polling place. And that is one of our priorities with regard to countywide polling going forward. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Representative Swanson.
Yes. How many of those 2,000 people who had to vote provisionally and their votes didn't count because they were at the wrong location, how many of those voted during that extra hour that was added by the judge in 8 Democrat precincts? How many of those people voted between 7 and 8 p.m.?
I don't have that information, but I can get it to you. So you're saying they would have arrived to the incorrect polling place between 7 and 8? I'm not sure, but we can probably look through that data and get that information to you.
When do you think you might have that?
It might take us maybe a week to get through the 2,000 ballots and figure out the time frame of the various provisional ballots.
Really? Okay. I guess I thought that was something you could probably do in 15 or 20 minutes. It's not that easy.
Oh no, we're looking at images of the ballots. So it's not a matter of a few keystrokes. This is something where we're actually going to have to look through the envelopes and see what time they were actually filled out.
Okay, I thought that was all kept and separated. I really have an idea that maybe this information's more readily available than you think.
I will ask.
Okay.
I will certainly ask, and we will get it to you as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Swanson.
Any other questions, members? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair calls Bruce Sherbet.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Madam Chair, thank you for offering to make some changes to this. I'm here today. I'm Bruce Sherbet representing Collin County as the elections administrator, and also myself as having been an elections administrator for 31 years, serving 3 counties. Collin County went to countywide polling places in 2009.
What was your position on the bill, sir?
I'm sorry, in opposition,
Okay.
as written right now.
Thank you.
With amendments, we shouldn't be opposed for us. We've had vote centers since 2009. Our total population is around 1 million, so we're 2.5 times more than the cap of what this, as it is worded right now. We have had great success with vote centers. I can give you some examples. In the 2018 election, midterm elections, we voted 61% turnout. The previous 5 elections was 37% turnout. We didn't have a line over 15 minutes all day long on election day. Same thing happened in the presidential election. We had a huge turnout for that, over 200,000 more registered voters than we did when we first started with the countywide polling places in 2009. In the presidential election, no waits over 15 minutes on election day, maybe a couple little exceptions along the way, but overall, just very, very successful. And I'll tell you this, if we have problems, I respect what you've said about concern about lines. And I agree with my good friend Chris Davis that we are all concerned about that. We don't know the impact of that. But I can tell you from my experience, and I've done elections in traditional polling places, vote centers, it's going to be the biggest challenge in early voting. It's going to be the biggest challenge the last 2 days of early voting because the turnouts and the wait times, historically for me at least, have been the last day of early voting. So we're going to have to take measures. We're going to have to, and it has nothing to do with vote centers. It has to do with us making sure we have enough equipment, enough personnel, and enough locations. But I do believe that vote centers, countywide polling places, solve problems. They don't create problems. The problems that they solve are ones dealing with voters going to the wrong location on election day, voting provisionally. And when they vote provisionally, if they're at the wrong location, that is rejected and they lose their vote. It's a very serious problem that we see across the board. Vote centers help that situation because you don't get rejected as a provisional voter in that situation. One thing also to factor in, voters going to the wrong location, voting provisional, it takes about 5 times longer to process that voter than a regular voter because you have to fill out all the paperwork and the forms for that. So I just hope you consider as we go down the road, I agree with what Mr. Davis said about maybe those that are starting up with countywide to keep the same number of locations and then see how it all works out and then maybe have an opportunity down the road to reduce those locations.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions? Madam Chair.
How many registered voters do you have in your county?
We have right at 600,000 registered voters, just under.
And how many precincts?
We have 226 voting precincts.
And does that include some of your 0 precincts? Or?
Yes, it does. There are probably a couple dozen of those.
Okay. So on your typical election day, how many polling places do you have?
We have about 75 polling places in a large election. Next year, we're going to have over 80. We know we're going to be increasing accordingly. We increase about 25 to 50,000 registered voters a year now, so we're growing extremely fast.
What about early voting locations?
Early voting locations, we have about half that number, around 35. We'll probably have around 45 next time. In the midterm elections, we voted 83% of our vote early. And in the presidential election, we voted 81% of our vote early. So when I tell you there are not lines on election day, it's because we're voting so many people voting early. If you look around the state, it's not just Collin County. 70% is an average on a major election of the vote being early. 75% in Dallas County and some other counties are that high. So that's what helps and that's what makes countywide polling place work so well because it's just an extension basically of early voting.
So, you know, I have seen numbers as far as turnout in some elections where the vast majority of people will vote early. And a smaller percentage on election day, it might be 60-40. and then the next election, those numbers are reversed. Have you not experienced that in your county?
In recent years, in the early years, when it went into effect in 1987, we saw some of that flipping back and forth a little bit. But in the last, for me, in the last 10 years, 50% on major elections has been the low mark, right at 50, maybe 48% early. In Dallas, even in 2008, it was 74% or something along that line. It was over 70%. And it's been consistent that way in the counties that I've been the elections administrator.
So when you go about deciding where to place those vote centers, how do you make a determination? I mean, are you looking at concentration of voters? I mean, how do you make those decisions?
Well, you look at your routes and you try to place them appropriately, and I do respect the legislation saying you need to have at least so many in, say, state rep districts, or if it's a commissioner district, if that's feasible to do that, so that you have them spread out. But geographically is how we look. It's more of where your populations are and geographically where you can place them. If you look at Collin County, our western side of the county is extremely dense in population. And it's almost like the Ponderosa on the east side. It's a lot of land and not very many houses. That doesn't mean you don't need locations over there, but you do have to have locations appropriately placed for your populations and making sure they're not too far in distance. So it is a process that you take your core group of locations, and if you're pairing out the areas that you can reduce locations without impacting the voters. It's not an exact science, but that's where Dorothy Kennedy from Lubbock talked to me about how she did it, and she started the process by getting a consortium of people together from all areas of that county to start talking about, here's the map. Let's go ahead and put all the places on it, then let's start taking off where we think we can do it without impacting voters.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Thank you very much. Chair calls Glenn Maxey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, Glenn Maxey, Texas Democratic Party. In opposition to House Bill 4048 as drafted, I think what we've heard throughout the day is our concern that we agree with, that we don't have long lines. And with implementation of voting centers, we've all heard the good parts about that, people voting where they are, ending the provisional ballots for people at the wrong places, all of that convenience. I would hope that in this bill, if we have the concern about these remaining counties, which I perceive are just Dallas, Bexar, Tarrant, and El Paso, that are still without voting centers above this population, that we simply tell them to keep the current number of precincts in their first cycle until they implement the program, know that it works, and then they begin trying to rearrange the deck chairs of where the voters actually are. And while y'all were on break today, Senate Bill 9 was voted on in the Senate, and the Senate put that language in Senate Bill 9 of keeping voting centers in these larger counties with the current process of selecting precincts in that law. It's not elegant language. It wasn't through Legislative Council, but when the bill gets to the House, maybe we can fix it, and in this bill do similar language to keep all the polling places possible open while we have these new counties come online.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair calls members, we do have Christina Atkins here from the Secretary of State's office as a resource if anybody would like to talk with her. She's been patiently waiting for us, keeping a positive attitude, smiling. Thank you. No questions. Moving on, Chair calls Ed Johnson.
Ed Johnson. I am representing myself, and I am for HB 4048. I think this is be a very good point to put a halt and do checks on it. We really need some checks in countywide voting systems. We need polling location checks, and we need bills like Representative Swanson's to do e-poll book checks to make sure it really works before they start doing this. That's the problem I see with just letting them go do this. You need to validate, they need to validate and test that they can do it before they start doing this, because it's not letting people vote, but it's the fraud that would occur if it's not working right, of people voting twice. So really need to put it in here. Just to give you some ideas of the volume of transactions and data that is going on countywide vote centers. Harris County on election day with their iPad system, not doing countywide vote centers, but it was the same thing, almost 300 million transactions transpired between all the iPads and the server on that. That is a huge amount of data. You've picked a very good stopping point. Using the same statistics on a presidential election, a county of 400,000 on an election day, that would be almost 14 million transactions. It's a large amount of data, and for a smaller county that may not have the network capabilities and all the top-end servers, because I mean, Harris County was spending big bucks and buying the best of the best. You know, smaller counties don't actually have that. You need to be able to check this. So it is a big amount of data that, or a very large amount of data that you need to make sure that they can handle accurately when they do this. If counties like, Williamson County, they're under a million transactions. 10,000 a day. That's nothing, because this explodes exponentially when you add locations and voters, because every location you add brings in another set of voters, and all those have to be communicated across all the other networks. So it really explodes exponentially, and that's why large counties really need to put a brake on it until we can get some good legislation to kind of govern this.
Members, any questions? Representative Swanson.
Yes, I want to go back to a subject that applies to this. And since you were there, how many of the, we had it reported 2,000 people who voted provisionally because they were in the wrong location. And of course, there were, in one precinct, they refused to do them provisionally, as the law says, even though they were told over and over. But out of the ones that did vote provisionally, how many of them voted between 7 and 8 p.m. at the 8 Democrat precincts that were ordered to stay open late by a Democrat judge? And we know for sure, because we caught them, that there were texts going out to many people saying, get to these places whether you live in that precinct or not. How many was that?
18 years of elections experience here. Yes, remember that night very well, because I stopped by a couple of those locations, and you were correct. There were texts out there. They had pizza, water, everything ready for big lines to come in. There were a little over 200 votes cast provisionally. There were 74 votes in one location that were not cast. They were cast straight votes with no provisional ballots. This should be easy information for the office to find, because all those provisionals had to be kept separate because of the category of voting late, and are saved on the image server in a special little folder called late voters. So, it wouldn't be a very difficult thing to look up. So yes, a fairly large number voted late provisionally, and then there were some judges that were refusing to follow the law and just let them vote a regular ballot that you can't pull back if you needed to, had the judge orders overturned. So it does make a difference.
Question, how many of those voters who voted late voted in a precinct or attempted to vote in a precinct that affected House District, help me out, it was Representative Schofield's district.
No, you put me on the test now to remember.
Or Representative Bohack's district.
I don't remember. I don't remember the
districts,
so very but I want to say it was around 30 votes that were counted in Schofield's district.
Okay, I'm just interested in those two because they were so very close.
So,
and trying to see whether it makes a difference
Yeah.
in this situation.
And it is a big concern of yours, Representative Click, on this countywide vote centers because, Travis County's been doing this and they claim to have, polling locations and not close any of them. But, I looked at their last election and they have 247 precincts this last November and they only opened up, 143 polling locations. So that's about a 50% cut right there. So, when they started, they had one every location, but over time, it's kind of dwindled down. So, I think this would be a big concern come November of limiting polling locations without the straight party ticket vote. You're going to be in big trouble. That's another reason that we should kind of slow these large counties down because that's where it's going to be a problem, is in the large counties. The rural counties, it's not going to be a problem.
Any other questions, Representative Swanson?
No.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, members? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our final speaker is Lexi Swirsky.
Before I give my speech, I want to give some pertinent information in regards to what Representative Swanson was just asking about. I was an election judge at one of the precincts held open late, and people would come in and be at the wrong place. I would say, "Who told you to come vote here?" They would clam up, not give me any clue or answer.
Ma'am, would you please just say your name, who you represent,
I'm
and
so
your
sorry.
position on the bill?
I'm Alexi Swirsky. I'm representing myself, and I am for House Bill 4048.
Thank you.
In addition, a friend of mine was a poll watcher at the held open location at the Fiesta Mart on Westheimer. The election judge allowed people to vote until 9 p.m. Many of them he did not even check their credentials, such as their IDs, and he allowed almost all of them to vote non-provisionally. Okay, here's my testimony. 6 of the 10 counties with the most growth in the United States are located in Texas. Harris County is the 3rd most populous county in the nation with 4.7 million residents. An issue with countywide polling centers in larger counties is if there is a problem such as machinery breaking down, it will affect a greater number of voters, may end up disenfranchising voters as the holdup in casting votes due to failed machinery results in backed up lines, which can cause some of those wanting to vote to leave before casting a ballot. Bigger sites, bigger problems. They affect more people. These are some other issues in countywide polling in large counties. Voters are unable to get to polling places located further away from their previous neighborhood polling place. Voters lose trust in election judges. They're used to where I previously lived for 30 years. We had the same judge for at least 25 years, and she's still there, and I trusted her. In countywide voting locations, I very much doubt people are going to develop a relationship with the election judges there. There's more potential for elections to be run not according to the law in bigger polling places. The iPads take time to update as to whether or not a person has voted, so people voting more than once could happen. The opportunity to favor some neighborhoods over others. Harris County Clerk Diane Troutman has said she would leave open polling sites, neighborhood polling sites with historical significance in the suffrage movement, for example. Voters deserve equal access to a polling location near their home, whether they do or do not live in an historical neighborhood. These problems are especially prevalent in large counties with less accountability between elected officials and voters. Also, since the problems on election day involve more machinery, they may take longer time to solve, resulting in more citizens not being able to vote. According to an article in USA Today from October 30th, 2018, quote, The burden of America's shrinking access to in-person voting options is falling more heavily on urban areas and minority voters. The impact of the disappearing and merging voting locations is more likely to challenge voters in urban counties where people are poor and less likely to have vehicles to get themselves to polling places outside their neighborhood on Election Day, unquote. Please vote for House Bill 4048. The countywide voting centers are expanded. There will actually be fewer, less convenient places for voters to vote on election days. Texas needs to move forward in increasing the number of citizens who vote, not backwards.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Thank you very much. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on for or against House Bill 4048? Seeing none, the chair recognizes Representative Click to close.
Thank you, members. I close.
If there is no objection, House Bill 4048 will be left pending. Chair hears no objection. House Bill 4048 is left pending without objection. Members, that concludes our testimony for today. If there's no objection, the Committee on Elections is now adjourned, subject to the call of the chair.